12 men entered my property. Then my quiet life turned into a court battle before sunrise. I heard 12 vehicles coming down my private ranch road. When I looked through my window, I saw men in tactical gear, a steel ram, and an HOA president standing at my gate like she already owned my land. She had a document with my name on it and believed I would simply surrender. What she didn't know was that every word, every step, and every mistake was being recorded. Stay with me until the end to see how the truth turned the entire situation around. If you enjoy stories about land, justice, and ordinary people standing their ground the right way, consider subscribing. More HOA and ranch stories are coming, where patience, evidence, and the law reveal what really happened. Why did an HOA send a tactical team to remove a ranch owner from land his family had owned for 70 years? At 4:43 in the morning, Caleb Walker woke up to the sound of engines rolling across his private ranch road. Not one vehicle, not two. A line of them. The sound carried through the quiet hills of western Montana, cutting through the silence that usually belonged to cattle, whined through the pines, and the old wooden gate at the entrance of Walker Creek Ranch. Caleb stepped onto his porch and looked toward the eastern service road. 3 black SUVs were parked near his gate. A white equipment truck sat behind them, and standing beside the entrance to his property were 12 men wearing matching tactical-style clothing, gloves, and heavy boots. One of them carried a steel ram. Caleb did not move. He simply watched. For 70 years, that gate had marked the boundary of his family's land. His grandfather had built it by hand from timber cut on the ranch. His father repaired it after storms. Caleb had replaced the hinges twice, but never changed the design. It was more than a gate. It was proof. Behind the 12 men stood Victoria Hayes. She stepped out of a black SUV wearing a clean white coat, holding a folder against her chest. She looked completely comfortable, like she was arriving at a property she already owned. That was the first thing Caleb noticed. Not the vehicles, not the men, the confidence. Victoria smiled when she saw him. "Caleb Walker," she called, "you have been given every opportunity to cooperate." Caleb walked closer, but stayed behind his gate. "Cooperate with what?" Victoria opened the folder. "With the lawful removal of yourself and your belongings from Pine Hollow Estates property." For a moment, Caleb said nothing. Then he looked past her toward the open fields behind the vehicles. His land, his road, his fence line, his lake. "Pine Hollow Estates property?" he repeated. Victoria's smile tightened. "Yes." She held up a document. "This order authorizes enforcement action due to your continued refusal to comply with community ownership requirements." Caleb looked at the paper. Even from several feet away, something felt wrong. He had spent years reviewing reports, maps, and operational documents. He knew how paperwork looked when someone wanted it to appear official. This had the appearance, but not the substance. "Who issued that order?" Caleb asked. Victoria glanced down. "A county authority." "That is not an answer." The men behind her shifted slightly. Victoria noticed. She lowered the document. "Mr. Walker, this situation does not need to become difficult. You have refused membership. You have ignored notices. You have blocked community access to a resource that benefits everyone." Caleb looked toward this distant tree line where his private lake sat beyond the ridge. A resource. That was how she described it. Not his family's land, not the water his grandfather had protected. A resource. "I have never been a member of your association," Caleb said. Victoria gave a small laugh. "That is exactly the kind of argument someone makes when they do not understand modern property management." Caleb stared at her. "I understand my deed." The smile disappeared for half a second. It was small, almost impossible to notice, but Caleb noticed. He had spent years noticing small changes, a person's hesitation, a change in tone, a hand moving towards something before the person realized they were doing it. Victoria recovered quickly. You were informed. The association has determined your property is subject to Pine Hollow Estates Authority. My property was here before Pine Hollow Estates existed. That is your opinion. No, Caleb answered calmly. That is a county record. The 12 men remained silent. They were waiting for Victoria's command. That told Caleb everything. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a plan. Victoria stepped closer to the gate. You should have accepted the agreement when we offered it. Caleb remembered those meetings, the polite conversations, the maps spread across his kitchen table, the requests for access, the offers for his lake road. Every conversation had sounded reasonable until the answer was no. Then the tone changed. You mean when I refused to sell access through my property? Caleb said. Victoria's expression hardened. I mean when you refused to be reasonable. Caleb looked at the steel ram resting against one of the vehicles. Then he looked back at her. Is that your definition of reasonable? For the first time, Victoria looked irritated. She turned toward the man holding the folder. Brock. A tall man stepped forward. He appeared to be in charge of the group. Mr. Walker, he announced, we have authorization to remove you from the property if you refuse voluntary compliance. Caleb looked at him. Who are you? Civil enforcement. Under what agency? Brock paused. Under the authority provided. That was not my question. The pause lasted longer this time. Behind the gate, Caleb remained completely still. But inside the house, hidden cameras were already recording. Every vehicle, every face, every word. Victoria did not know that. None of them did. Caleb had installed the cameras years earlier, after a series of trespassing incidents near the lake. He had upgraded the system recently, after Victoria's visits became more aggressive. Every camera feed was backed up. Every conversation was being saved. Victoria stepped forward again. Mr. Walker, you are making this harder than it needs to be. Caleb looked at the 12 men, then at the document in her hand, then back at Victoria. No. His voice stayed quiet. You are. The morning air became heavy with silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Victoria looked toward Brock. Open the gate. The order was simple, almost casual. That was what bothered Caleb most. She was not nervous. She believed she had already won. Brock reached for the paperwork again. We have an order. Caleb looked directly at the camera mounted near the corner of his barn, then back at Brock. Hold that paper up where the camera can see it. Brock did not move. Why? Because if it is real, you have nothing to hide. Victoria immediately stepped in. That will not be necessary. Caleb looked at her. That answer told him more than anything else. The document was not the weapon. The confidence was. Victoria believed the people around her would obey before anyone questioned the truth. She believed a uniform-looking vest and an official-sounding title were enough. She was about to learn otherwise. Brock lowered the paper. Last warning, Mr. Walker. Caleb looked at the men standing outside his gate, then at Victoria. I am giving you one. Victoria laughed quietly. You? Caleb nodded. Yes. He pointed toward the property around him. This land has boundaries. This land has records. This land has an owner. His eyes moved back to the document. And if you cross that gate without legal authority, every person standing here will have to explain why. Victoria's expression changed. Only slightly, but enough. Because for the first time that morning, she looked uncertain. Then the sound of another vehicle came from the road. A sheriff's cruiser approached through the dust. Victoria smiled again. There he is. She turned toward the arriving vehicle. Now this will be handled properly. The cruiser stopped near the gate. Sheriff Daniel Brooks stepped out. He looked at Victoria, then at the 12 men, then at Caleb. For several seconds, he said nothing. His eyes moved past Caleb toward the inside of the house. Hanging near the doorway was an old framed insignia, a Marine Raider emblem. Daniel Brooks stopped. The expression on his face changed. Not fear, recognition. Caleb noticed immediately. Victoria did not. She walked toward the sheriff with confidence. "Sheriff Brooks, thank you for coming. This man is refusing a lawful removal order." Daniel did not answer right away. He looked back at the insignia, then at Caleb.
I figured you'd be here.
"Caleb Walker," he said slowly.
We need to discuss
Caleb
the
nodded.
situation.
"Yes, Sheriff." Daniel studied him for another moment. Then he asked the question Victoria never expected. "Were you ever with Marine Raiders?" The 12 men looked confused. Victoria looked annoyed. She stepped forward. "What does that have to do with anything?" Daniel ignored her. His eyes stayed on Caleb. Caleb glanced briefly toward the old insignia inside his home, then back at the sheriff. Yes. A silence settled over the ranch. Because Sheriff Daniel Brooks understood something Victoria Hayes did not. The man she came to remove was not the man she thought she was dealing with, and the document in her hand was about to become the biggest mistake she had ever made. Sheriff Daniel Brooks stood near Caleb Walker's gate, studying the scene in front of him. 12 men, 3 SUVs, a steel ram, and a woman holding a document that was supposed to give her the authority to remove a man from his own land. Victoria Hayes watched the sheriff carefully. She expected support. She expected him to see a homeowner refusing to cooperate. Instead, Daniel looked at the paper in her hand with the same suspicion he had shown when he saw Caleb's Marine Raider insignia. "Victoria," Daniel said, "before anyone does anything else, I need to see that order." Her smile faded slightly. "Of course, Sheriff. That is exactly why I called you." She handed him the document. Daniel read it slowly. Caleb watched from behind the gate. He knew the sheriff was not looking at the words. He was looking for what was missing. After nearly 30 years in law enforcement, Daniel Brooks knew that fake authority often depended on one thing: making people too intimidated to ask questions. The sheriff flipped the page. "Who filed this?" Victoria answered quickly. "The association." "That is not what I asked." A small pause. "The association's legal department." Daniel looked up. "Name?" Victoria's expression tightened. "Sheriff, I believe we are getting distracted." "No." Daniel folded the paper. "I believe we are getting started." Behind Victoria, Brock Harlan shifted his weight. The confidence of the group was beginning to change. They had arrived expecting a simple removal. They were discovering that questions were being asked before anyone stepped onto the property. Daniel turned toward Caleb. "Mr. Walker, how long have you owned this property?" "My family has held the land for decades. Is this property inside Pine Hollow Estates?" "No," Victoria immediately interrupted. "That is exactly the dispute. His property was absorbed into the community development area." Caleb looked at her. "Absorbed?" The word sounded strange even to her. Daniel noticed. "Do you have documentation showing that?" Victoria opened her folder. "We have records." Caleb almost smiled. Not because the situation was funny, because he had heard that word before. Records. A vague word people used when they did not want to say what kind. Daniel looked at Caleb. "Do you have your records?" "Yes." "Get them." Victoria stepped forward. "Sheriff, this is unnecessary. The association has already completed the legal process." Daniel looked back at her. "Then showing the documents should make this easier." That was the first moment Victoria lost control of the conversation. Only briefly. But Caleb noticed. 6 months earlier, this same woman had arrived at his ranch with a different attitude. No tactical team, no threats, no steel ram, just a folder and a smile. She had stood outside his gate and acted like she was doing him a favor. At the time, she called it a neighborhood adjustment. Now Caleb understood what it really was: a test. She wanted to know whether he would surrender before she had to force him. The first letter arrived shortly after Pine Hollow Estates expanded toward his property. It looked professional, polite, almost harmless. The letter thanked Caleb for being a valued neighboring property owner and invited him to participate in community integration. The second letter was less friendly. It stated that Caleb's property created visual inconsistencies with the surrounding neighborhood. The third letter contained the first demand: a $17,600 association membership fee. Caleb remembered reading that number twice. Not because he was shocked by the amount, because he was shocked by the assumption behind it. Someone had decided they owned a piece of his life. He responded with one thing: a copy of his deed, then the county plat map, then the property records showing Walker Creek Ranch existed long before Pine Hollow Estates was ever planned. He expected that would end the matter. It did not. Victoria returned 2 weeks later, this time with 2 board members behind her. "We are trying to avoid conflict," she told him. Caleb stood beside his truck. "There is no conflict." Victoria looked confused. "Yes, there is." "No," Caleb said. "There is a request." I denied it. Her expression changed. That was when Caleb learned something important about Victoria Hayes. She did not hear no, she heard resistance, and she treated resistance like a problem to solve. Back at the gate, Caleb returned carrying a weathered document case. He handed it to Daniel. Inside were copies of his deed, survey records, property tax records, county boundary maps. Daniel reviewed them carefully. Victoria watched his face. She was waiting for doubt. She did not find it. "This parcel predates Pine Hollow Estates," Daniel said. Victoria immediately responded. "That does not mean anything." Daniel looked up. "It means quite a lot." She stepped closer. "The community has surrounded this property for years. We maintain the roads. We maintain the area. We have invested millions nearby." Caleb looked at her. Nearby is not the same as ownership. The words landed harder than he expected, because they were simple, and they were true. Daniel closed the document folder. "Victoria, do you have any recorded easement giving Pine Hollow Estates access through this ranch?" Her silence answered before she did. "We are still finalizing some paperwork." Caleb looked at Daniel. There it was, the first crack. Not a mistake, not confusion, a missing legal foundation. Daniel handed the documents back. "Until ownership and authority are established, nobody enters this property." Brock stepped forward. "We were contracted to perform an enforcement action." Daniel looked at him. "By whom?" "Pine Hollow Estates. Not a government agency?" "No." "Not a court?" Brock hesitated. "No." Daniel nodded. "Then you are not enforcement." The 12 men suddenly looked less like a team and more like individuals, realizing they had walked into something they did not understand. Victoria saw it happening. She stepped between them. "This is not over." Caleb believed her, because people like Victoria rarely stopped when facts became inconvenient. They simply changed strategies. Later that afternoon, Caleb sat at his kitchen table with Rachel Morgan. The same documents were spread between them. Rachel read everything twice, then she looked up. She is not trying to enforce HOA rules. Caleb leaned back. What is she doing? Rachel tapped the map. She is trying to create ownership after the fact. Caleb looked toward the window. Beyond the glass was the road leading toward his private lake. The same road Victoria wanted. The same land she claimed was already hers. Rachel lowered her voice. And that means there is something here worth taking. Caleb looked at the map again. For the first time, he wondered if the HOA dispute was never about rules. Maybe it was about something much bigger, something valuable enough for Victoria Hayes to risk everything. And if she was willing to send 12 men to his gate. Caleb knew one thing. The next move would not be a letter. Victoria Hayes had already tried polite requests. She had tried pressure. She had tried sending 12 men to his gate with a document that collapsed the moment someone asked basic questions. People did not risk that much over a fence line. They risked that much over something valuable. And Caleb had a pretty good idea what that something was. The lake. Walker Creek Lake sat on the eastern side of his ranch, surrounded by timber, open pasture, and the same mountains his family had looked at for generations. It was not a public lake. It was not a community attraction. It was private property connected to his land through old water rights and family records. But recently, Victoria Hayes had stopped talking about his fence. She started talking about access. Rachel Morgan spread the county maps across Caleb's kitchen table the following morning. She had highlighted several areas in different colors. "This is Pine Hollow Estates," she said. Then she pointed toward the lake. "This is your property." Then she placed a third document beside them. "And this is Silver Ridge Development Group." Caleb studied the papers. Michael Reynolds. Rachel nodded. The developer. Caleb recognized the name. Michael Reynolds was known throughout the county for building expensive mountain communities. Luxury cabins, private trails, vacation properties marketed toward wealthy buyers from outside Montana. "He wants the lake," Caleb said. Rachel looked at him. "He wants what the lake gives him." She tapped the map. Access. The road leading to the eastern side of Walker Creek Lake crossed through Caleb's ranch. There was no public road, no recorded easement, no agreement allowing commercial use. Without that route, Silver Ridge could not build what it promised investors. Rachel pulled out a folder. "I started digging after our meeting yesterday. Something stood out." She opened a copy of a development proposal. At the top was the name, Silver Ridge Lake Retreat. Caleb read through the pages. The proposal included private waterfront cabins, a marina area, a guest lodge, a private access road. He stopped. "Private access road," Rachel nodded. "Look where it runs." She placed the development map beside Caleb's original property survey. The line was obvious. The proposed road crossed directly through Walker Creek Ranch. Caleb stared at the map. They sold access before they had access. That is what it looks like. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Because this changed everything. A person could make a mistake. A person could misunderstand a boundary. But promising investors a road through land they did not own was different. That was a plan. Caleb leaned back in his chair. "How long has Victoria known?" Rachel looked through the documents. "That is the question." The answer came from someone Caleb did not expect. Tom Ellis. Tom owned the ranch bordering Caleb's western fence line. He had known the Walker family for decades and had watched Pine Hollow Estates grow from empty land into a neighborhood surrounding the old ranch. When Caleb called him, Tom arrived less than an hour later in his faded pickup truck. He stepped inside, removed his hat, and placed a worn folder on the table. "I wondered when this day would come." Caleb looked at him. "You knew?" Tom shook his head. "I knew they were trying." He opened the folder. Inside were copies of old letters. The first one was dated 3 years earlier. The sender was Michael Reynolds. The request was simple, a temporary construction access agreement. Tom read the letter aloud. "They wanted permission to study a route across your eastern property line." Caleb looked up. "And my uncle refused?" Tom nodded. "He refused because there was never a reason to give them access." Rachel looked at the document. "Was there ever an easement?" "No," Tom pointed to the letter. "That was the problem. They wanted one." Caleb flipped through the pages. Another letter, another request, another attempt. Every time the answer had been the same. No. They knew, Rachel said quietly. Caleb looked at her. Knew what? That your land was never part of their development plans. She closed the folder. They knew they needed your permission. The room became quiet, because that was the part that bothered Caleb most. Not that Victoria wanted something. People wanted things all the time. It was the belief that refusing her meant he was the problem. Victoria had looked at his ranch and seen an obstacle, not a home, not a family property, an obstacle. Later that afternoon, Caleb drove to the edge of his lake. He stood beside the old wooden fence that separated the pasture from the water. For years, this place had been the one part of the ranch where everything slowed down. No meetings, no arguments, no strangers asking what they could take. But now he saw the orange survey flags near the tree line. Someone had been marking possible routes. Someone had been planning. He pulled one from the ground. No permission, no notice. Just another quiet attempt to make a decision before anyone could stop them. That evening, Rachel contacted the county records office. The answer came back quickly. There was no recorded access agreement, no transfer, no public right-of-way, nothing connecting Pine Hollow Estates or Silver Ridge Development Group to Walker Creek Lake. But then Rachel found something else. A meeting record from the Pine Hollow Estates Board. She read it twice. Then she called Caleb. Caleb, you need to see this. He drove to her office immediately. Rachel placed the document in front of him. It was a board meeting summary. The date was 6 months earlier, before Victoria sent the first membership demand, before the eviction order, before the 12 men arrived. One line was underlined. Lake access resolution approved pending final landowner compliance. Caleb looked up. Landowner compliance? Rachel nodded. They were waiting for you to give in. Caleb read the sentence again. They had already decided the outcome. They were not negotiating. They were creating pressure until the paperwork matched their plan. Rachel continued. There is more. She placed another document on the table, a projected financial report. The number at the bottom caught Caleb's attention. Estimated development value, $11 million. That was the number, the reason behind everything. Victoria was not trying to control his property because of an HOA rule. She was trying to unlock an $11 million project, and Caleb Walker was the only thing standing in the way. The next morning, Victoria sent another message. This time it was not polite. It was not a request. It was a warning. Final opportunity to cooperate before further action is taken. Caleb read the message once, then handed it to Rachel. She looked at him. What are you going to do? Caleb looked through the window toward the distant lake. The same lake Victoria wanted. The same land his family protected. I'm going to find out how far she is willing to go. Rachel nodded, because both of them knew the answer was coming. Victoria had already crossed one line. Now they needed to know if she was willing to cross another. The answer came 3 days later. Not with another letter. Not with another meeting. This time, it came in a certified envelope delivered to Caleb Walker's mailbox. The envelope was thick, official-looking, the kind of document designed to make people stop asking questions. Caleb stood beside his porch table and opened it carefully. Inside was a notice ordering him to vacate Walker Creek Ranch within 72 hours. The language was direct. The property was allegedly subject to Pine Hollow Estates Authority. His continued presence was described as unauthorized occupancy. Failure to comply would result in enforcement action. At the bottom of the page was a signature, a judge's name, a court seal, a case number. For someone unfamiliar with legal documents, it looked convincing. But Caleb did not read it like a frightened homeowner. He read it like someone trained to look for inconsistencies. And the first thing he noticed was the timing. 72 hours, ending before the courthouse reopened after the weekend. A deadline designed to create panic. Not a legal process, a pressure tactic. Caleb placed the document on the table and called Rachel Morgan. She answered within minutes. What happened? I received an eviction order. There was a pause. An actual court order? That is what they want it to look like. Rachel understood immediately. Send me everything. Caleb scanned every page and sent the copies. While Rachel reviewed the documents, Caleb sat quietly at the kitchen table. The same table where Victoria had once sat pretending she wanted cooperation. Now she was trying to remove him from the land. The difference was simple. Before, she wanted permission. Now, she wanted authority. And when people could not get authority legally, they often tried to manufacture it. An hour later, Rachel called back. Her voice was calm, but Caleb could tell something had changed. It is fake. Caleb looked out toward the ranch road. Are you sure? Yes. Rachel opened the records while she spoke. The judge's signature is wrong. Caleb listened carefully. The case number? Fake. The court seal? Copied, she continued. There is no eviction filing, no hearing, no motion, no order. Caleb looked again at the document sitting on the table. A piece of paper that was supposed to change ownership. A piece of paper that was supposed to force him from his home, and it had no legal foundation at all. Then why send it? Caleb asked. Rachel answered immediately. To see if you believe it. That sentence stayed with him. Because it explained everything. Victoria did not need the document to survive court. She needed it to work before court. She needed him to leave voluntarily. She needed the property empty before anyone had time to challenge her. Rachel continued. Caleb, I want you to understand something. This is no longer an HOA dispute. What is it? Fraud. The word was simple, but it changed the entire situation. A disagreement over property rules could be argued. A boundary issue could be surveyed. A misunderstanding could be corrected. But a forged legal document was something different. Someone had decided the law was just another tool to imitate. That afternoon, Rachel drove to the county courthouse. Caleb went with her. They walked through the records office carrying the same document Victoria had sent. The clerk examined it carefully. Then she looked at Caleb. I have never seen this case. Rachel placed the paper on the counter. Can you verify the number? The clerk typed into the system. A few seconds later, her expression changed. This case number belongs to a bankruptcy filing. From when? Rachel asked. 4 years ago. Caleb looked at Rachel. The document was not just false. It was built from someone else's legal record. Someone had taken an old case number and used it to make a fake eviction order appear legitimate. The clerk printed the record. Rachel studied it. This was copied from a public filing. Caleb nodded slowly. So they counted on nobody checking. Exactly. Outside the courthouse, Rachel stopped near her vehicle. We need to move quickly. Because of the deadline? Yes. She looked toward the road. If Victoria believes this works, she may act before we can get a hearing. Caleb understood. The paper was not the attack. The paper was the warning. The real attack would come when Victoria believed there was no time left for anyone to stop her. That evening, Caleb contacted Sheriff Daniel Brooks. He did not accuse anyone. He did not exaggerate. He simply provided information. A possible unlawful attempt to remove him from private property. A questionable court document. A group already prepared to enter his land. Daniel listened carefully. Caleb, I need you to understand something. I do. No matter what happens, stay calm. Caleb almost smiled. Daniel had seen the insignia. He knew who he was talking to. But he also knew something more important. The law worked best when the person being wronged did not give the other side an excuse. I will, Caleb said. After the call ended, Caleb walked outside. The ranch was quiet. The same fences, the same fields, the same road leading toward the lake. But it no longer felt like a simple property dispute. Someone had created fake legal authority. Someone had prepared a team. Someone believed that if they moved fast enough, nobody would stop them. Caleb checked the cameras around the property. Then he checked the backup system. Every recording was still working. Every file was protected. Every piece of evidence had a place. The next morning, Rachel sent Victoria a formal notice. It was short, direct, no threats, no emotion. It stated that Caleb Walker disputed the fraudulent order, that all communication must proceed through legal channels, and that any attempt to enter the property without lawful authority would be documented and pursued. For several hours, there was no response. Then Victoria called. Caleb answered. Her voice sounded different, less polished, more impatient. "You are making a mistake." Caleb looked toward the ranch gate. "No. You do not understand the situation. I understand it better now." Silence. Then Victoria said, "You think paperwork protects you?" Caleb did not answer, because that was exactly the question. Paperwork could be forged, authority could be imitated, confidence could be manufactured. But evidence was different. Evidence stayed. Victoria ended the call. That night, Caleb noticed a vehicle slowing near his property line. Then another. They did not enter. They did not stop. They were watching. Caleb stood beside the window and looked toward the darkness beyond the gate. The invasion had not started yet, but the preparation had. And this time, Caleb knew exactly what Victoria Hayes was willing to do. The only question left was how many people she was willing to bring with her. For the next 2 days, Caleb did not leave Walker Creek Ranch unattended, not because he was afraid, because he understood the pattern. Victoria had already tested his patience. She had already tested the legal system. Now she would test whether she could create a situation where the truth arrived too late. That was how people like her operated. They did not always win because they were right. They won because they moved before anyone had time to stop them. Caleb spent the morning with Rachel Morgan reviewing every document connected to the property. The original deed, the county plat, the lake records, the tax history, the old survey markers, everything that proved one simple fact. Walker Creek Ranch belonged to Caleb Walker, not Pine Hollow Estates, not Silver Ridge Development Group, not anyone who wanted access badly enough. Rachel placed the forged eviction order beside the legitimate records. The contrast was obvious. One had decades of history behind it. The other had a copied seal and a borrowed case number. "Caleb," Rachel said, "there is something else we need to consider." He looked up. "What?" "If Victoria believes this document failed, she may try to create a different kind of pressure." "What kind?" Rachel glanced toward the ranch road. "The kind that makes a person react emotionally." Caleb understood. A public argument, a confrontation, a situation where Victoria could claim he was unreasonable. That was why he had spent his life learning control. The hardest moments were not the ones where people attacked. They were the moments when someone wanted you to attack back. By sunset, Caleb had completed a full review of the ranch security system. The cameras covered the main gate, the lake road, the eastern access trail, the barn, the equipment area. Every recording automatically backed up to a secure location Rachel could access. He also moved the original deed and historical records into a protected storage box. Not hidden, protected. There was a difference. Caleb was not preparing for a fight. He was preserving evidence. That evening, he called Sheriff Daniel Brooks again. Daniel answered quickly. "Any movement?" "Not yet. But you expect it?" "Yes." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Caleb, I reviewed the document you sent." "And?" "It is not an eviction order." Caleb already knew, but hearing it from the sheriff mattered. Daniel continued. It is designed to look like one. That is what Rachel believes. She is right. The sheriff paused. There is one more thing. Caleb waited. The security company involved. Brock Harlan? Yes, Harlan Civil Solutions. Daniel looked into the company records. They are licensed as a private security contractor, but they are not a law enforcement agency. Caleb looked toward the ranch entrance. So Victoria hired people who look official. Exactly. That was the part that bothered Daniel. Not just the fake document. The appearance of authority. People trusted uniforms, they trusted vehicles, they trusted confidence. Victoria understood that. She was building a situation where people might believe her before they ever checked the facts. After the call, Caleb walked the property line. He stopped near the old wooden gate, the same gate where Victoria had stood days earlier, the same gate where 12 men would eventually stand. He placed his hand on the old timber. His grandfather built it. His father repaired it. Now someone else wanted to decide who belonged behind it. The next morning, Caleb found something unusual. A small vehicle parked near the northern tree line. Not on his property, just close enough to watch. When Caleb approached in his truck, the vehicle left. He did not chase it. He photographed it, recorded the time, saved the image. Another piece of evidence. Later that afternoon, Tom Ellis arrived. He parked beside the barn and looked toward the road. "They are getting desperate," Tom said. Caleb nodded. "Why?" Tom looked at him. "Because they already promised something they cannot deliver." That sentence stayed with Caleb because it explained Victoria's behavior. She was not trying to convince him. She was trying to remove the obstacle between her promise and the money waiting on the other side. Tom handed Caleb another folder. "I found this in my old files." Inside were copies of property discussions from years earlier. One document showed Michael Reynolds had contacted several landowners near Pine Hollow Estates. The same request, the same access route, the same lake. Caleb read the page carefully. "They knew," Tom nodded. "They knew your family would not sell." Rachel reviewed the documents that evening. Then she found something important. A development timeline. Silver Ridge had already announced future lake access improvements publicly. The announcement was dated 2 months before Caleb ever received the first HOA letter. Rachel looked at Caleb. They advertised access before they had permission. Caleb stared at the page. That was the missing piece. Victoria was not trying to get approval. She was trying to create the appearance that approval already existed. The pressure, the letters, the fake eviction. Everything was designed to force reality to catch up with a plan that had already been sold. Rachel closed the folder. "This changes our strategy." "How?" "We stop responding to their claims." Caleb looked at her. "Then what?" "We document the pattern." She pointed toward the evidence. "The more they escalate, the stronger our case becomes." Caleb understood. Victoria believed every move brought her closer to victory. She did not realize every move was creating evidence. That night, Caleb checked the cameras one more time. The ranch was quiet. The lake road was empty. The gate stood closed. Then, at 4:43 in the morning, his motion sensor activated. A notification appeared on his phone. Vehicle movement. Eastern Access Road. Then another. And another. Caleb looked at the screen. 12 vehicles, slowly entering the ranch boundary. He did not panic. He did not reach for anything. He simply opened the recording system. The cameras turned toward the road. And this time, everything Victoria Hayes planned to hide would be captured. Every vehicle, every person, every word. The invasion had begun. Caleb watched the camera feeds from inside Walker Creek Ranch as the vehicles moved slowly down the eastern access road. 3 black SUVs first, then the equipment truck, then Victoria Hayes' vehicle, exactly as he expected. No surprise, no confusion, a planned operation. The cameras captured everything. The time, the vehicles, the people, the equipment, every detail that would later matter. Caleb stood inside his home with his phone connected to the recording system. Rachel Morgan was already receiving the live backup. Sheriff Daniel Brooks had been notified. Nobody was rushing. Nobody was making threats, because Caleb understood something Victoria did not. The truth did not need to move fast. It only needed to survive. Outside, 12 men stepped out of the vehicles. They wore matching dark jackets marked with the words, Civil Enforcement. But there was no government agency name, no official identification, no court officer. Just an appearance. A costume designed to create authority. Victoria Hayes walked to the front of the group holding the same folder from the fake eviction order, the same document that had already been proven meaningless. She looked toward the house. "Caleb Walker," her voice carried across the property. "You have been given enough time." Caleb walked toward the front entrance. He did not open the door. He did not step outside. He simply spoke through the intercom. "Victoria," she looked up. "You are currently standing on private property." She smiled. "You still believe that?" "Yes." "Even after receiving the order?" "Yes." The answer annoyed her. Not because it was unexpected, because it was calm. Victoria wanted anger. She wanted fear. She wanted Caleb to make a mistake. Instead, he gave her nothing. Brock Harlan stepped forward. "We have legal authority to remove you from the residence." Caleb looked at the camera above the entrance, then back at Brock. "Show the document." Brock held up the folder. "Open the door, and this can be handled peacefully." Caleb shook his head. "That is not what I asked." A pause. "Show the document." Victoria stepped forward. "Mr. Walker, this is your final warning." Caleb looked at her. "No." His voice remained steady. "This is yours." For the first time, several of the men looked uncomfortable. They had expected a frightened homeowner, someone who would argue, someone who would create chaos. They did not expect someone who was carefully recording every second. Brock raised a bullhorn. "Mr. Walker, you are refusing a lawful order." Caleb answered immediately. "I am refusing an unlawful demand." Victoria's expression hardened. She turned toward Brock. "Proceed." The word was simple, but the cameras captured it. The men moved toward the entrance. Caleb stepped away from the door. Not because he was surrendering, because he understood positioning. The entrance, the hallway, the cameras. Every angle mattered. The first man reached the porch. Another moved toward the exterior camera. A metal shield was raised. They tried to block the view, but the second camera remained active. The one Victoria did not know existed. Caleb watched the monitor. One camera blocked, another recording. Exactly why evidence mattered. People could hide from one witness, not from all of them. Brock reached the door. "Last chance." Caleb looked at the camera, then answered, "You have no court order." Brock ignored him. "You have no right to enter." Brock ignored him. "You are committing trespass." Brock ignored him. Then Victoria said the sentence that changed everything. "Break the door." The words were clear, direct, recorded. No explanation, no misunderstanding. The men hesitated, only for a moment. But the hesitation was there, because everyone understood what those words meant. This was no longer a property dispute. This was an order to force entry. The steel ram hit the door. The sound echoed through the house. Caleb did not move toward them. He did not shout. He did not react emotionally. He activated another recording, a timestamp, a location marker, a complete chain of evidence. The second strike damaged the frame. The third caused the wood to split. Victoria watched from outside. She looked confident. She believed the hardest part was over. She believed once Caleb was removed, the paperwork would follow. She did not understand that she had just created the evidence Rachel needed. The door finally gave way. Brock and several men entered. They expected panic. Instead, they found Caleb standing several feet away with his hands visible. No weapon, no aggression, only a phone recording. "Everyone inside this home is being recorded," Caleb said. Brock stopped. "You are interfering with enforcement." "No." Caleb looked directly at him. "I am documenting unlawful entry." Several men looked toward Brock. The confidence had changed. The situation no longer looked like an official removal. It looked like exactly what Caleb had warned them it was. A group of private contractors entering a home without legal authority. Brock looked toward Victoria through the broken doorway. She was still outside, safe, watching. Caleb noticed. "So you came inside?" Brock looked back. "What? You and your men are the ones standing here." Caleb pointed toward the camera. "Victoria is outside." Nobody answered, because everyone understood the implication. The person giving orders was not the person taking the risk. Brock tried to continue. "We are here under contract." Caleb nodded. "Exactly." The word landed differently, because a contract was not a court order. A company was not a government agency, and a uniform was not authority. One of the younger men lowered his equipment. "Brock." The hesitation was obvious. Brock turned. "Keep moving." But the group had changed. They had entered expecting a confrontation. Instead, they had found evidence. They had entered expecting a victim. Instead, they found a witness. Outside, Victoria saw the uncertainty spreading. She walked closer. "Do not stop!" Her voice became sharper. "Finish this!" Caleb heard her through the open doorway. The cameras heard her too. Rachel heard her. And somewhere deep inside the situation, Victoria Hayes made the mistake that would follow her for the rest of her life. She stopped pretending. She gave the evidence a voice. The men inside the house were no longer just following a questionable order. They were following a recorded command. And every second they stayed inside Walker Creek Ranch was another second added to the case against them. Then sirens appeared in the distance. Victoria turned. The sheriff had arrived. For the first time that morning, her confidence disappeared. Because the story she planned to tell was simple. A difficult homeowner refused to leave. But now there was another version. A version recorded from 12 different angles. A version where the fake order was exposed. A version where Victoria Hayes herself ordered the door opened. Sheriff Daniel Brooks stepped out of his vehicle. He looked at the broken entrance. The 12 men, the cameras, then Victoria. And Caleb knew the next few minutes would decide everything. Not because of who had the most people. Not because of who appeared more powerful. Because now the truth had arrived. Sheriff Daniel Brooks stood in the middle of Walker Creek Ranch, looking at the scene in front of him. A broken front door. 12 men wearing tactical-style clothing, a damaged property entrance, and Victoria Hayes standing nearby holding a document that was supposed to justify everything. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Victoria was the first to move. "Sheriff, thank goodness you are here." Her voice changed instantly. The confidence from earlier was replaced with concern, a performance. "This man has refused to comply with a lawful order," she said. "These men were hired to assist with enforcement, and he has become aggressive." Caleb stood near that doorway. He looked at Daniel, then at the cameras, then back at Victoria. He said nothing. He did not need to. The recordings were already speaking for him. Daniel looked at Victoria. "Is that what happened?" "Yes, exactly. Yes." Daniel nodded slowly. Then he looked toward the broken door. "Who authorized entry?" Victoria lifted the document. "The order did." Daniel held out his hand. "Let me see it." She gave it to him. He studied the page, the same way he had earlier, not reading the words, reading the details, the missing pieces, the inconsistencies. "What court issued this?" he asked. Victoria answered quickly. "It is all listed there." Daniel looked up. "That was not my question." A pause, the same pause Caleb had seen before. Victoria was used to people accepting her answers. She was not used to people examining them. "The court information is attached," she said. Daniel folded the paper. "Then it will be easy to verify." Brock Harlan stepped forward. "Sheriff, we were acting under contract." Daniel looked at him. "Who are you?" "Brock Harlan, Harlan Civil Solutions." "Are you law enforcement?" "No." "Court officers?" "No." "Government employees?" "No." Daniel nodded. "Then explain why your company entered a private residence." Brock looked uncomfortable. "Because we were instructed that the order was valid." Daniel looked toward Victoria. "By her?" Brock hesitated. That hesitation mattered. Victoria immediately stepped in. "This is becoming unnecessary." Daniel turned back to her. "No." His voice stayed calm. "This is becoming clear." Caleb watched silently, because this was the moment everything changed. The entire plan depended on confusion. Victoria wanted the sheriff to see a dispute. She wanted him to see a difficult homeowner. She wanted the broken door to tell the story. But now Daniel was asking what happened before the door broke, and that was where Victoria's story failed. "Mr. Walker," Daniel said, "do you have any evidence showing what happened before I arrived?" Caleb nodded. "Yes." He walked toward the interior office. Victoria watched him. "What evidence?" Caleb stopped. "The evidence you created." A few minutes later, Rachel Morgan arrived with a secured copy of the recordings. She stepped out of her vehicle carrying a small case. Victoria's expression changed when she saw her. "You brought an attorney?" Caleb answered. "No." Rachel walked forward. "I was already involved before today." Daniel looked at her. "Rachel." She nodded. "Sheriff." Rachel opened the case. Inside were printed documents. The original deed, county property maps, copies of the fraudulent eviction order, and a drive containing the recordings. "This property belongs to Caleb Walker," Rachel said. Victoria shook her head. "That is not the issue." Rachel looked at her. "Actually, that is exactly the issue." She handed the deed to Daniel. "The ranch predates Pine Hollow Estates. There is no recorded transfer, no membership agreement, no easement granting this association authority over Mr. Walker's property." Daniel reviewed the document. Then he looked at Victoria. "Do you have anything showing otherwise?" Victoria opened her mouth. Nothing came out immediately. That silence was louder than any answer. Rachel connected the recording. The first video appeared. The timestamp showed 4:43 a.m. The vehicles entering the ranch, the men stepping out, Victoria standing behind them. Daniel watched. Nobody spoke. Then the audio played. Brock's voice. "Mr. Walker, you have 30 seconds to surrender." Then Caleb's response. "You have no court order." Then Victoria's voice. Clear, direct. "Break the door." The entire scene became quiet. Even the men who had entered the house looked away, because hearing it again changed everything. There was no confusion, no misunderstanding, no accidental escalation. A decision had been made. Rachel continued the recording. Caleb warning them, the men entering, the cameras being blocked, Victoria directing them from outside. Daniel watched every second. Then he looked at Caleb. "You never touched anyone?" "No." "You never threatened anyone?" "No." "You only recorded?" "Yes." Daniel looked back at the footage. That answer mattered, because the difference between protecting yourself and creating a conflict was clear. Caleb had chosen evidence. Victoria had chosen force. One of the younger men approached Daniel quietly. "Sheriff?" Daniel turned. The man looked nervous. "I didn't know the order was fake." Daniel looked at him. "Did you verify it?" The man lowered his eyes. No. That was the problem. Everyone had trusted the appearance of authority. Nobody had checked the truth. Then Daniel noticed something near the damaged doorway. The framed insignia inside Caleb's house. The Marine Raider emblem. He looked at Caleb. You served? Caleb nodded. 14 years. Marine Raiders? Yes. Daniel stared for a moment. I knew someone with that insignia. Caleb waited. My brother served with a Raider unit. The sheriff looked back at the broken doorway, then at the 12 men, then at Victoria, and suddenly, he understood something important. The calm he had witnessed was not weakness. It was discipline. Caleb had not failed to react. He had chosen not to. Victoria noticed the change in Daniel's expression. His military background has nothing to do with this. Daniel looked at her. You are right. A pause. It does not. He held up the fake order. The documents do. That was the moment Victoria realized the situation had moved beyond her control. The sheriff was not seeing a property disagreement. He was seeing a planned, unlawful entry. Rachel gathered the documents. This is only the beginning. Daniel looked at her. What else? Rachel glanced at Caleb, then back at the sheriff. We believe the fake eviction was connected to the lake access dispute. Victoria immediately reacted. That is an accusation, Rachel answered calmly. No. She held up the development records. It is evidence. Daniel looked at the documents. The name Silver Ridge Development Group appeared across the top. His expression changed, because now there was another question. Why was an HOA president willing to forge a court order over a ranch road? And what was waiting at the end of that road? Those questions followed Caleb Walker after the morning Victoria Hayes lost control of the story she had spent months creating. The broken door was repaired temporarily. The 12 men from Harlan Civil Solutions were interviewed separately. The fake eviction order was placed into evidence. But Caleb knew the damaged entrance was only the surface. Someone had not gone that far just to win an argument about HOA rules. There was a reason, and Rachel Morgan was determined to find it. 2 days after the attempted removal, Rachel sat across from Caleb at his kitchen table with documents spread across the same surface where Victoria had once tried to convince him to cooperate. Only this time, the conversation was different. There were no requests, no pressure, only evidence. Rachel placed a financial report in front of him. Pine Hollow Estates has a problem. Caleb looked down. How big? Rachel turned the document around. Large enough that someone was willing to risk a criminal case. The report showed irregular payments from HOA accounts over the previous 2 years. Consulting fees, emergency maintenance charges, security expenses, large payments to companies Caleb had never heard of. Rachel pointed to several entries. These companies are the first thing that caught my attention. Why? Because they barely exist. She explained that some of the vendors listed in the HOA records had no active offices, no employees, and no clear history of providing the services they billed for. The money was leaving the association, but nobody could explain where it was going. Then Rachel found something else, a connection. Several of the companies shared the same mailing address. The address was linked to properties controlled by people close to Victoria Hayes. Caleb looked at the records again. So she was taking money from the association? We are still proving the full chain, Rachel said, but the pattern is there. Before Caleb could answer, there was a knock at the door. Linda Parker stood outside, the HOA treasurer, the woman who had spent years approving budgets and reviewing expenses. But today she looked different. Not confident, not defensive, worried. Caleb let her in. Linda placed a folder on the table. I should have come sooner. Rachel looked at her carefully. Why didn't you? Linda sat down. Because I wanted to believe there was an explanation. She opened the folder. Inside were copies of internal HOA documents, meeting notes, payment records, private emails. I was the treasurer, Linda said. I saw the numbers every month. I knew something was wrong. Caleb studied her. What stopped you? Linda looked down. Victoria. The room became quiet. She was good at making people doubt themselves, Linda continued. Every time someone questioned a decision, she said they were hurting the community. She made it sound like anyone opposing her was against progress. Rachel looked through the documents. When did you realize it was more than bad management? Linda pointed to one file. This. Rachel opened it. The document showed a transfer from Pine Hollow Estates funds. The payment description was vague. Community Development Consulting. The amount was large. Rachel looked up. Who received this? Linda answered quietly. Silver Ridge Development Group. Caleb leaned forward. Michael Reynolds. Linda nodded. That was the connection. The HOA money, the fake eviction, the lake access. All of it was connected. Rachel continued reviewing the records. Then she stopped. Wait. She pulled out another page. This payment date. She looked at Caleb. It was made 3 weeks before Victoria sent you the first membership demand. Caleb understood. The pressure had started after the deal was already moving. Victoria was not discovering an opportunity. She was protecting one. Linda handed Rachel another document. This was from a board meeting. Rachel read it. Her expression changed. What? Caleb asked. Rachel placed the paper down. They already told investors the lake access issue would be resolved. When? Before you ever agreed to anything. Caleb looked at Linda. Meaning? Linda answered. Meaning Victoria promised them your property. Nobody spoke for several seconds, because this was the missing piece. Victoria did not believe she had a chance of getting Caleb's land. She believed she had already sold the idea that she owned it. The letters, the fees, the fake court order, the 12 men. They were all attempts to force reality to match a promise. Rachel closed the folder. This explains the urgency. Caleb looked toward the lake through the window. They needed me gone. Yes. Why now? Rachel pulled out a development schedule. Silver Ridge Development Group had a construction timeline. The first phase was scheduled to begin within weeks. Cabins, road improvements, lake access preparation. Everything depended on Walker Creek Ranch. Caleb looked at the date. They were running out of time. Rachel nodded. And desperate people make mistakes. The next mistake came that afternoon. Sheriff Daniel Brooks called. Caleb. The tone immediately told him something had happened. What is it? We questioned Brock Harlan again. Caleb waited. He changed his statement. Rachel looked up. What did he say? Daniel answered. He said Victoria told him the property would be empty before Monday morning. Caleb felt his expression tighten. Empty? Yes. Rachel immediately understood. That was not an eviction. Daniel continued. So, he also mentioned a construction crew was supposed to arrive after the removal. Caleb looked at Rachel. The meaning was clear. They were not just planning to remove him. They were planning to move forward immediately after, create a situation that would be harder to reverse. Rachel stood and gathered the documents. Then we have our next move. What is it? We stop waiting for Victoria to explain herself. She looked at the evidence. We show everyone what she was building. That evening, Caleb stood beside the old ranch gate, the same gate where 12 men had arrived believing they had authority. But now the picture was different. The invasion had failed, the fake order had collapsed, and the money trail was leading somewhere much bigger. Victoria Hayes had not attacked Caleb because she hated him. She attacked him because his land was the final piece of a deal worth millions, And now that the truth was coming out, she had only one choice left: try to control the story, or lose control of everything. That was the choice Victoria Hayes faced after the evidence from Walker Creek Ranch reached the county courthouse. For weeks, Victoria had controlled the conversation. She told Pine Hollow Estates residents that Caleb Walker was unreasonable. She told investors that the lake access issue was temporary. She told her board that every decision was necessary for the future of the community. But now the story was no longer being told by Victoria. It was being told by documents, by recordings, by records she could not explain. The hearing began in front of Judge Robert Mitchell 3 days after Sheriff Daniel Brooks completed his initial investigation. The courtroom was full. Pine Hollow Estates residents filled the seats behind Rachel Morgan. Some looked angry. Some looked embarrassed. Others simply looked confused, because many of them had believed Victoria. They had trusted the person standing at the front of their community meetings, the person who always seemed certain, the person who always had an answer. Until now. Victoria sat beside her attorney. She looked different. The confidence was still there, but it was thinner, more controlled. The same woman who had stood at Caleb's gate with 12 men now sat across from a stack of evidence she could not dismiss. Judge Robert Mitchell looked over the documents. The court will first address the alleged eviction order. Rachel stood. Your Honor, the document presented by Victoria Hayes was not issued by this court. She placed a copy on the table. It contained a copied seal, a false case number, and a signature that does not belong to the judge listed. The courtroom became silent. Judge Mitchell reviewed the document carefully. Then he looked toward Victoria. Ms. Hayes, do you dispute that this order was used during the attempted removal of Mr. Walker? Victoria's attorney answered quickly. There was confusion regarding the document's origin. Rachel turned. Confusion does not explain a forged court order. The judge looked at the attorney. Continue. Rachel walked toward the evidence table. The defense wants this court to believe this was a misunderstanding. She held up the recording. But the evidence shows something very different. The courtroom screens displayed the footage from Caleb's ranch. The timestamp appeared. 4:43 a.m., the vehicles arriving, the men stepping onto the property, Victoria standing behind them. Then the audio. Brock Harlan's voice. Mr. Walker, you have been ordered to leave. Then Caleb's response. You have no court order. Then Victoria's voice. Clear. Calm. Break the door. Several residents looked toward Victoria. She did not look back. Rachel allowed the silence to remain. Because sometimes the strongest evidence did not need explanation. It only needed to be heard. Judge Mitchell watched the recording again. Then he asked, Ms. Hayes, is that your voice? Victoria's attorney stood. Your Honor, we object to the interpretation of the recording. Judge Mitchell looked at him. The question was simple. A pause. Victoria answered. Yes. The room changed. Not because she admitted wrongdoing, not yet, but because she admitted the words belonged to her. Rachel continued. This was not an enforcement action. It was an attempt to remove a private landowner from property the association never owned. She placed the deed on the table. Walker Creek Ranch existed before Pine Hollow Estates. The HOA has no recorded ownership interest, no access easement, no authority. Then she placed another document beside it. The Silver Ridge Development Group proposal. Michael Reynolds sat farther back in the courtroom. Until that moment, he had avoided attention. Now everyone was looking at him. Rachel pointed to the development map. This project required access through Mr. Walker's property. She turned toward Victoria. And Ms. Hayes represented to investors that this access would be obtained. Michael Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. His attorney whispered something to him. The courtroom noticed. Rachel continued. That promise created the pressure. She pointed to the evidence. The letters. Another document. The membership demand. Another. The fraudulent eviction order. Another. The private security contract. Then the financial records. And payments made through Pine Hollow Estates accounts. The final documents changed the room, because this was no longer only about Caleb Walker. It was about every person who had paid HOA dues. Linda Parker stepped forward as a witness. She looked nervous, but she did not look away. "I was the treasurer," Linda said. The judge nodded. "And what did you discover?" Linda looked toward Victoria, then back at the judge. "I discovered money leaving the association without legitimate explanation." She described the payments, the fake contractors, the questionable consulting fees, the transfers connected to Silver Ridge. "I thought maybe I was missing something," Linda said. Her voice lowered. "But I realized I was looking at the same thing everyone else was seeing." "What was that?" "That the association was being used for something other than the community." The room remained quiet, because the people sitting behind Rachel were no longer just witnesses. They were victims of the same deception. Victoria finally spoke. "This is ridiculous." Everyone looked at her. She stood. "I built Pine Hollow Estates into what it is today." Judge Mitchell looked at her. "That does not answer the allegations." "I was trying to improve the community," Rachel responded calmly. "Then why did you promise land you did not own?" Victoria looked at her. No answer. "Why did you use association money for private development negotiations?" Silence. "Why did you send 12 people to remove a homeowner before any court reviewed the claim?" Victoria's expression hardened, because there was no explanation that could change what the evidence showed. Judge Mitchell reviewed the documents one final time. Then he spoke. "Authority does not come from confidence." The courtroom became still. "It does not come from a title, a position, or the number of people willing to enforce it." He looked toward Victoria. "It comes from the law." The ruling was immediate. The eviction order was declared invalid. The HOA was prohibited from claiming ownership or control over Caleb Walker's property. The financial records were referred for further investigation, and the attempted removal would proceed as a matter of potential criminal conduct. Victoria sat silently. The woman who once believed she controlled the entire situation had lost the one thing she depended on: control. After the hearing, Michael Reynolds approached Rachel. His expression was different. No confidence, no promises, only concern. "I did not know how far this had gone." Rachel looked at him. "You knew enough." He lowered his eyes. Within hours, Silver Ridge Development Group announced it was withdrawing from the project. The lake resort plans were suspended. The access road that Victoria promised investors no longer existed, because it was never hers to give. Outside the courthouse, Caleb stood beside Rachel. The fight was not completely over. There would still be investigations. There would still be consequences. But the most important question had already been answered. The land was still his. The records were still true. And the person who believed she could rewrite ownership with enough confidence had finally learned the one rule she ignored from the beginning. Paper can lie. Evidence cannot. But as Caleb looked toward the courthouse doors closing behind Victoria Hayes, he knew one final question remained. What happens to a community after it discovers the person who claimed to protect it was the one who betrayed it? The answer did not come immediately. For the residents of Pine Hollow Estates, the truth was harder to accept than the accusations themselves. For years, Victoria Hayes had been the person standing at the front of every meeting. She spoke confidently. She promised improvements. She talked about protecting property values and building a better future. And many people believed her, until the evidence showed what had been happening behind closed doors. Within days of the court hearing, Pine Hollow Estates held an emergency community meeting. Not in the usual boardroom, not with Victoria leading the discussion. This time, residents arrived carrying questions. Where did the money go? Why were they never told about Silver Ridge Development Group? Why was an HOA president using association resources to pressure a landowner who was not even a member? And the biggest question, how did nobody stop it sooner? Linda Parker stood before the residents and answered honestly. I should have asked harder questions. The room became quiet, because that was the part many people struggled with. Victoria had not controlled the community only through documents. She controlled it through confidence. She made people believe that questioning her meant questioning progress. But now the same residents were looking at the numbers themselves, and the numbers told a different story. The independent audit began immediately. The results confirmed what Rachel Morgan had suspected. Large payments had been made without proper approval. Several vendors could not verify the work they claimed to complete. Development-related expenses had been mixed with normal HOA expenses, and money intended for community improvements had been redirected toward a project that depended on Caleb Walker surrendering his land. The HOA that claimed to protect property rights had spent years trying to ignore someone else's. Meanwhile, Caleb returned to Walker Creek Ranch. The repairs began slowly. The damaged entrance was restored. The broken door was replaced. The cameras remained. Not because Caleb expected another attack, because he had learned something important. Peace did not mean ignoring problems. Peace meant knowing they were handled. One afternoon, Sheriff Daniel Brooks stopped by the ranch. He parked near the old wooden gate and walked toward the house. The same place where 12 men had arrived believing they had authority. The same place where Victoria believed Caleb would finally give up. Daniel looked at the repaired entrance. Looks better. Caleb nodded. It does. Daniel smiled slightly. You know, I have responded to a lot of property disputes. Caleb waited. Most of them start with people arguing over where the line is. He looked toward the lake. But this one was different. How? Daniel looked back at him. The line was never the problem. Caleb understood. The boundary was always clear. The problem was someone believing they could move it. A few weeks later, the criminal investigation moved forward. Victoria Hayes faced charges connected to the fraudulent documents, unlawful entry attempt, and misuse of association funds. Brock Harlan and several members of the security team cooperated with investigators. Their statements confirmed what the recordings had already shown. The operation was not accidental. It was planned. The fake eviction document, the scheduled arrival, the attempt to gain control of the property before legal review. Every step had been designed around the assumption that Caleb would surrender. He did not. And that was why everything failed. Michael Reynolds also faced consequences. The Silver Ridge Development Group project collapsed after investors discovered the access problems and the legal issues surrounding the land. The lake resort that Victoria promised never existed, because the foundation it was built on was never ownership. It was assumption. Months later, Judge Robert Mitchell issued the final ruling confirming Walker Creek Ranch remained independent from Pine Hollow Estates. The HOA had no ownership claim, no authority over Caleb's land, no right to demand access. The ruling restored something that had never actually been lost: the truth. On the day Caleb received the final documents, he walked down to the lake. The water was quiet. The fence line remained exactly where it had always been. Nothing about the land had changed, except the people who now understood it. Tom Ellis joined him near the shoreline. You know what is strange? Caleb looked over. What? Everyone thought you were fighting for your property. Caleb waited. But you ended up fighting for theirs too. Caleb looked back toward the hills. He understood what Tom meant. Because many Pine Hollow residents had lost money. They had trusted the wrong person. They had ignored warning signs because it was easier to believe everything was under control. The lesson was not only about Victoria Hayes, it was about responsibility. A community could have rules. A community could have leaders. A community could have documents. But none of those things mattered if people stopped paying attention. Later that year, Pine Hollow Estates adopted new requirements. Every major contract required public review. Financial records were audited independently. Board decisions were documented and archived. No single person could authorize major legal actions without oversight. The changes were not created because of one ranch owner. They were created because people finally understood what happened when nobody questioned power. Caleb never joined Pine Hollow Estates. He never wanted to. His home remained where it had always been, on Walker Creek Ranch, the land his family protected, the lake his family cared for, the place Victoria Hayes believed she could take because she believed nobody would stop her. One evening, Rachel visited the ranch. She stood near the old gate and looked across the property. You know, most people would have been angry. Caleb looked at her. I was. Rachel smiled. You never showed it. Caleb looked toward the lake. Anger is useful, he paused, but it should not decide what happens next. Rachel nodded, because that was the difference between Caleb and Victoria. Victoria used power to force outcomes. Caleb used evidence to reveal the truth. One created fear, the other created accountability. As the sun lowered behind the mountains, Caleb walked back toward the house. The same house 12 men had entered, believing they could control. The same house Victoria believed would belong to her. The front door closed behind him, not as a barrier, as a reminder. Ownership was not protected by intimidation. It was protected by records, by patience, by people willing to stand for what was true, and by a legal system that, when given the evidence, could still hold the powerful accountable. Caleb Walker never needed to defeat Victoria Hayes in a fight. He never needed to prove he was stronger. He only needed to prove one thing. The land was his. The law agreed. And no forged document, no title, and no amount of confidence could change that.
The lesson from Caleb Walker's story is simple. When someone challenges what you own and what is rightfully yours, staying calm, keeping records, and trusting the proper process can matter more than reacting in anger. Caleb did not protect his brand by reacting a bigger conflict. He protected it by reserving evidence, relying on the truth of his record, and allowing the law to examine what really happened. There is something powerful about that kind of quiet strength. A home, a ranch, or a piece of land is not only measured by its value. It carries memories, responsibility, and the history of the people who care for it. Standing firm does not always mean fighting louder. Sometimes it means staying patient until the facts speak for themselves. If you ever deal with an HOA dispute, a property disagreement, or simply believe people should have a fair chance to be heard, share your thoughts below. Drop a justice in the comments or tell us what you would have done in Caleb's situation. And if you enjoy stories about land, perseverance, and ordinary people standing strong through difficult moments, consider subscribing. Stay with us for more HOA and ranch story where dignity, truth, patience make all the difference.